Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Nick Roy with Safe and Civil Schools. And in a minute, I'm going to hand it over to Randy Sprick, but I just wanted to overview some of the collaborative tools we're going to use in today's webinar. So if you look right under the main slide window, you're going to see various icons for chat and later for polling. Throughout the webinar, we will turn on these tools to get some audience feedback. They're pretty easy to use. You just click on the icon. You should see it pop up in a little window, and then you can either add your chat or your polling answer. On the webinar today are also two additional Safe and Civil School panelists, Elizabeth Winford and Caitlin Milliken, and they're going to help moderate the chat, answer questions, and relay feedback to Randy. So we're going to do our best to address all the feedback, but we may miss some of it, so thank you for your understanding. Finally, if you have to leave at any point, know that the webinar is being recorded, and we will send out a link tomorrow. With that, I'll hand it over to Randy.
Thank you so much, Nick, and thank you, Caitlin and Elizabeth. I just want to start with what a privilege it is to work with the whole Safe and Civil Schools team, and these three in particular are here to help make sure that this goes as smoothly as possible. I'm Randy Sprick. I kind of started Safe and Civil Schools. I've been working with schools and children's behavior and motivation pretty much throughout my entire career, and just love the field of behavior because no matter how much one knows, whether you're an educator, or whether you're a parent, or whether you're both, it's never quite enough, and it's always hugely challenging. Let me thank you for joining us. In the title, Positive and Productive Childcare, while the kids are not in school, the word childcare is our effort to honor. We know that some of you are raising nieces and nephews, some of you are raising grandchildren. Now, for the sake of ease, just for the sake of my own language and keeping things easy, during the session, I'm going to refer to you as parents, but please know we totally honor that if you are not the parent, but you are doing childcare. I have two grandchildren, soon to be 5 and 7, and my wife and I get to spend lots of time with them, and so when they're with us, we're facilitating that parenting that my son-in-law and daughter do most of, but we supplement and support. So know that anybody who is working with the kids at any given moment, we're referring to that as parenting. And our approach is Safe and Civil Schools. Some of you probably learned about this because we publicized it really just through our contact list, is some of your schools, some of your whole districts utilize Safe and Civil Schools for their classroom management approach, which is called CHAMPS, and or their school-wide discipline approach, which is called Foundations. And this session, of course, we're focusing on childcare in the home, parenting in the home, which right now, because so many schools are closed, is immensely challenging. So again, thank you for joining us for this, and let me kind of jump right in with a few introductory thoughts. First, every single one of you as parents have already set limits. You may think there are days that things feel completely out of control or whatever, but your kids aren't running off, a 3-year-old isn't running off to go play on the freeway. You have set limits so that you ensure that that doesn't happen. And so really what we're talking about is where do you put that line between freedom of choice for the child, but also limits that we have to set for parents. And part of that is going to depend tremendously on the maturity and judgment of the child, but also a huge difference with age level. And I want to find out a little bit about kind of the age levels represented with a poll in just a couple of minutes. But before we do that, just know that I'm going to be giving examples from very young kids up through teenage kids. But where we set those limits, there's no right answer on that. You already have limits set, and some areas that are perhaps somewhat difficult in the home, maybe because some of the limits aren't clear. And we'll talk about some ways to do that. I also want to let you know I'm a parent. My kids are in their 30s. I mentioned I'm a grandparent as well. And one thing I learned before Marilyn and I had our kids, and I don't even know what to attribute this line to, but I found it hugely comforting, and even during times of stress in parenting, because no matter how much you know, there are times that you're thinking, we're blowing this, that we're making huge errors. And the advice was, you need to get it right 51% of the time. And if we get it right more often than we get it wrong, over time, we will be able to help shape the behavior and the maturity of our kids. And really what we are talking about here, I'm going to be offering you 10 tips, but these 10 tips are about shaping behavior. I know when you're in the midst of something that is a real problem and is awful in terms of what's going on in the home at any given moment, that it feels like we need a magical cure to make this better. And I wish I could give it to you. But there aren't going to be magical cures. You survived just fine yesterday, even if you had some huge challenges. You're surviving just fine today. And this is about, let's make it a little bit better tomorrow, and a little bit better the next day, and a little bit better the next day. And then the next day we'll have some setbacks, and it'll feel like we're making no progress. But then the next day we'll make a little bit more progress. And if we're getting it right 51% of the time, guess what? It's all going to work out. But with that being said, I want to offer you 10 ideas. And I hope these ideas are, number one, hopeful, because there's so much going on in our world right now that is frightening. I hope they're helpful. I hope they're specifics that you can apply immediately. And I hope you've already gotten a sense that these are offered respectfully and they're offered humbly. If I'm ever sounding like, well, now all you have to do is, or what you've got to do now is, I'm doing this wrong. This is about trying to choose some strategies to go from the home that you are already providing that is working just fine, even though some days it probably doesn't feel that way, but is working just fine, and just making it a little bit better. Now, I did have to make a decision in laying this out. Do I try to cover a fair number of techniques or strategies or ways of thinking about things? And 10 is pretty ambitious for the time, because I've already usurped 5 minutes of my time. But I want to give you what we think in Safe and Civil Schools are some of the most powerful nuggets of strategies that can make a difference in shaping the behavior of children, whether it's in the classroom or whether it's in the home. I also am going to just mention in advance, and we'll clarify this a little bit more at the end, if this approach feels helpful and you're a school administrator, one of the things that we are prepared to offer at Safe and Civil Schools is expanding these strategies into 4 sessions that could be offered as web-based sessions to the families of your children, wherein it would be geared directly to your school's families, and we could help set up facilitators of your school counselors, psychologists, some of your teachers, who could then be answering questions of the parents and doing some guided discussions and other things. So this, kind of think of this as a quick survey course of critical variables. Those of you who are families, I hope you can grab a hold of a couple of these, and they will improve life a little bit tomorrow, and a little bit more the next day, and a little bit more the next day. But before we do that, let me find out just a touch about the age range. So Nick is going to pull up a poll for us that just asks, how old is your child or children? Now, if you've got 1 in preschool, 2 in elementary, 1 in middle school, and 1 in high school, you should be doing this session instead of me, because if you've survived to this point, you're doing great. Just pick any one of those. If you've got 3 kids in elementary and 1 in middle, probably select elementary, unless the middle school child is 3 times more difficult than the 3 elementary kids, then select middle school. But it will just help shape the examples that I choose to use in the time that we have remaining. So click on how old is your child, and Nick is going to kind of watch those coming in. And when he thinks things are slowing down in terms of you, the participants, being able to respond to this, then he'll let us know there's a few seconds left. Then he's going to close it, and he'll show us the results. And hopefully I can gear my comments to how this comes out. If it's evenly split, I'll try to do fairly evenly split. If it's really skewed one way or the other, I'll try to skew my examples a little bit more in that direction.
Poll's slowed down, so I'm going to end it and share, Randy.
Thank you very much, Nate. Okay, so elementary is the preponderance, and then a pretty good even distribution between preschool, middle school, and high school. I really appreciate all of you being here with us. I will skew a little bit to elementary, but given that we have things spread out all the way, I'll try to choose examples all the way through. Thank you so much, Nick. Also, just a quick reminder as I'm going through these 10, Caitlin and Elizabeth are going to be monitoring any content questions you have. Nick will monitor any technical questions. If the audio cut out or something, he can try to help us with those. But go to that chat box and we will try to be as responsive to these as we can. I also am going to turn back to Elizabeth and Caitlin, probably in about 15 minutes now, and they will have been monitoring the questions, and they're going to feed me a couple of questions that might have been asked by a fair number of you. Okay, so let's get to these 10. The first one is a little bit abstract, and I hope that you will spend some time on it beyond the few minutes that I'm going to spend here. But the first tip is be aware of where you are going as a parent. And I'm going to ask that you think through some words that you would hope could describe your children when they're grown. I'm so proud of my kids because each of them, all of them are so, what words would you choose? How do you want to be able to describe your kids? Now, I'm going to show you a range in just a minute, but I'm going to tell you 4, and I actually have put it on a little Post-it note here, and I'm going to encourage you when you select them, do the same thing. Put it on a Post-it note where you're going to see it whenever you might review these notes, or when you're just going online to do other things. But here are 4 things, and my own kids are probably on the webinar right now, and they're going to hate that I'm talking about them. But this is a proud papa saying, my grown kids are kind, they're ethical, they're strong, and they're responsible. And although there's subsets of each of those are 4 traits that I value greatly. And although I have had an amazingly blessed career and am so fortunate in every aspect of my life, one of the things that I'm proudest of is that my kids are kind, they're ethical, they're strong, they're responsible. My grandchildren are shaping up to be kind, ethical, strong, and responsible. So this is based in part on a quote from the philosopher Seneca. You must know where you are going if you're to catch the right wind to take you there. And you have to keep that destination in mind, because there are times that the winds can be blowing you sideways this way and times sideways this way. And although I'm not a sailor, my son and my good friend Kevin Hansen are, they know that even when the wind is going completely against you, if you know that you're going there, you can use that wind against you, not to directly fight the wind, but to use that wind to try to get you where you're going. If you don't know where you're going, the wind just blows you all over the place. Well, in any time of life and any aspect of parenting, but particularly during this time period where all of us are under stress because of what the world is going through right now, we can just get blown all over the place. So keep yourself somewhat centered. And if you haven't done that before, I'm just going to show you 2 screens worth. And really, you don't even need my screen suggestion. Don't be limited to these, but you'll see some examples: compassionate, creative, curious, ethical, who you are as a person, what you value as a person, what you value from your spiritual beliefs, what you value from what you've learned in your jobs, what you have learned from bosses that you've liked and didn't like, what you've learned from teachers that you have both liked and didn't like, will help you determine you can't do all of these. You can't do all of these at once anyhow, but if you haven't picked 3 or 4, please do so, because I'm going to come back to this idea. Here's another screen with these. Kind, loyal, moderate, persevering, polite, respectable, respectful, responsible, self-directed, spiritual, strong, thoughtful, thrifty. I shared your 4 that are really valuable to me. Pick 2, 3, or 4. You can develop some subsets later on. If you chose strong, later on you can shape that with perseverance as part of being strong. Being flexible but ethical is part of being strong. But initially, if you want your children to be strong, Just focus on that. You can get to the subsets later. So don't pick 6 of these, pick 2, 3, or 4, and keep them in mind, because that's going to be your touchstone. That's going to be your North Star. Even when the winds are going against us, mixing our metaphors here, I still want to go to that North Star. What are those words? I can't tell you what those words should be. You should work on them together. Those of you who are caregivers, 2 parents in the home, parent and grandparent, raising the kids together, pick the words that you want so that you're all also pulling in the same direction. That's the real hopeful part of the message. The second strategy that I'm going to ask you to think about that gives us a framework for doing the other strategies, which are more practical things to do, is also be aware which are the misbehaviors that drive you crazy and drive every parent crazy. List some of the misbehaviors or even attributes. Don't worry about if it's even kind of nebulous. The child's too dependent. Well, dependent really isn't a behavior, but it can be a problem. I want my child to be more independent, and he's too dependent. Or he's too independent, or whatever else. I'm going to show you a list. This one has 3 screens on it. But what I want you to pick is, I want you to pick on this one, the 1, 2, 3, possibly 4, but especially the 1 and 2 that are right now most getting in the way of you having the home feeling the way you want it to feel. The things that are most getting in the way of being productive with helping your kids with whatever schoolwork they have during this time, being productive in terms of just the interactions that we have, and so on. So here's a few ideas. And any of you that are going, yep, arguing, yep, clingy, yep, complaining, yep, crying, yep, daydreams, yep, demanding. All kids have all of these at one time or another. But what are the 1, 2, 3, or 4 that are driving you the most crazy? Now, if you've got 4 kids, think about your kids as an amalgam. Okay, of the 4 of them, what's driving me the most crazy? Now, if you've got 1 or 2, you would do this separately for the 1. If you've got 2, you could do this separately for each. Oh, with this child, it's this and this. With this child, it's this and this. It could be jealous. It could be loud. It could be manipulative, name calling, negotiating, procrastinating, refusing to follow directions, arguing about directions, selfish. And again, don't be limited to these. And those of you who have good behavior background like me, you're probably cringing a little bit about something as non-behavioral as snotty. But if you've got a kid that annoys you because he's snotty, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Spoiled, talks all the time, tantrums, whiny, won't do chores, won't pay attention. And again, pick a few of these. The others kind of try to survive. You survived yesterday. Maybe didn't feel great all the time, but you survived. So don't try to address 7 different things all at once. Now, again, just a reminder, in the chat box, right now in the chat box, different task. In the chat box, which I can look at too, I'm not monitoring the questions because I'm letting Caitlin and Elizabeth do that so I can try to focus on the content and watch it, be respectful of your time as well so that I end within the hour. But I'm going to watch the chat box on this one. If you had to pick just one behavior that's driving you a bit crazy, what might it be? And I'm seeing complaining, talking too much, defiance, and it's going fast. So this is great. Clingy, loud, disrespectful, too independent, procrastinating, attitude, whining. Isn't it funny how easy this one is to do? The other one, where do we want to go? That's harder. Unfocused, mouthiness, defiance, disrespectful, instant gratification, defiance showing up quite a bit, arguing, picking on others. Thank you for that. Feel free to keep going because that can feel a little bit cathartic, but also pick one that you want to think about for when we're going through the rest of these, and you can gradually expand it to 1 or 2 more. But what I'm going to talk to you about, so the first strategy is know where you're going. Please spend some time on that one because you want to use those traits or those values over and over and over in how you raise your children between now and when they're adults. The behaviors, think about what's most annoying right now and focus on that. And the third strategy is for some of the misbehaviors. If any of them are annoying but mild, or they just started. Wow, what started today? Try to correct it really gently. Now, a gentle correction, privately as possible, but I'm going to tell you a gentle correction that most families have. And even if you use it consistently, this is a hard one because you have to use it over and over again, but it's most of us in our homes, if we hand the child something and he or she does not say thank you, we have a standard correction, sort of a Jeopardy thing. It's in the form of a question, but it's not really a question. What do you say when somebody gives you something? And the child goes, oh, thank you. Okay, watching my beloved, strong, kind grandchildren growing up, we're correcting over and over and over. What do you say when somebody gives you something? We don't need to put them on a point contract for it. We don't need to send them to timeout for it, because it's just easy anytime they forget to say, what do you say when somebody gives you something? And they're getting better and better and better. You don't need to make a big deal of it. If you have something like arguing, if you can define for your kids, here's what I mean by arguing. This would not be arguing. This is how you interact without arguing. You can just say that's arguing, and you can say, I'll listen to you when you can do that in a better tone of voice, or particularly if you've shown them, this is an arguing tone of voice. This is not an arguing tone of voice. You can just say, that's arguing. I'll listen to you when you can talk to me with a quiet voice. So any of these that you can correct just by literally relentlessly high expectations, that's arguing. I'm not going to talk to you right now. What do you say when somebody gives you something? Do that, because it's low stress on you, it's low energy on you, and it just becomes a habit. Discussions. If you are going to talk to your kids about arguing, and you are going to use a gentle correction, and your children's language is above a 3 or 4-year-old's language. Now, any of you that have older children with cognitive delays or cognitive problems of any kind, and they only have a 1-year-old receptive language, this probably may not make much sense. Feel free to disregard it. But certainly an average language ability of a 3 or 4-year-old, and certainly of a 15-year-old, you can sit down with them at a calm, neutral time, not right after it's a problem, and go, I want to talk about a problem that I think is getting in the way in our family. I'm calling it arguing, and here's what I mean by arguing. It's this tone of voice, it's this kind of language, it's this kind of volume. I want to get away from that. And here is the kind of tone of voice that I would rather we use. Here's the kind of tone of voice that we should use. Here's the kind of thing that we can say. Tell your child in advance, this is what we're going to be working on, and then tell them. Now, the next strategy we're going to talk about is consequences for misbehavior. These are all the easy things, the sort of just common sense things. Consequences are another, but if you decide that there need to be consequences for, let's say, refusing to follow directions, part of this calm, neutral time discussion would be, and if you refuse to follow directions, then the consequence is going to be X or Y. But this discussion is at a calm, neutral time, not right at the moment that you're emotionally engaged because the child refused to follow your directions. Now, this one's going to sound contradictory. This guy's talking out of both sides of his head, and in some ways that I am, but an emotional reaction is just fine if you can keep it infrequent. Now, any behavior that you wrote down, that you sent to us in the chat box, that I read a few of as we were rolling through that, I'm going to recommend you don't use an emotional reaction on those, because I'm guessing you've already used that one quite a bit. Just the fact that it came to mind, this is what's driving me crazy. An emotional reaction is perfectly okay. If the first time your child does something and it shocks you because it was not a kind way to treat Auntie Susan, you could pull that child aside and say, I am angry right now. But if you overuse it, your child it just becomes background noise. So keep that one, if you can, in reserve. Now, the next one, humor. Here's an example of what I mean by humor. I don't mean something that makes fun of the child. But there's an old movie called The Court Jester that my kids loved when they were kids. It was a little too old for my grandkids. They just didn't really get it. But there's a line from that movie that is used over and over and over. That is when somebody's trying to give this court jester, who's this kind of doofy guy, just a lovable but doofy guy, when they give him a direction, this is serious. They give the direction and they go, "Get it?" The jester goes, "Got it." And then the person giving the direction says, "Good." I've been using that with my grandkids. Now, following directions is not a particular problem with them, but when I give it direction, we just started playing with this week. I go, "Okay, what's the direction?" "Cool." "Get it?" They go, "Got it." I say, "Good." And it's just a fun little interchange. That's a nice way to use humor. What you don't want to do is make fun of a child by going, "Oh, that's such a nice tone of voice." Don't do that, okay? For anything that you've written down here, in fact, be cautious of responding in a way that tries to make it funny. In the discussion, you want to make it sound like it's important. In your gentle corrections, you want to make it sound like it's an important. Now, humor is incredibly valuable. We in our home, we laugh all the time. We have great fun. But I will say this, I don't think any of us use humor to try to say, "Please don't treat me that way." That's more of a direct communication, a direct discussion. Okay, now this next topic, I wish with this next topic we could really spend a full hour on this one alone. Excuse me, we're going to go to consequences for misbehavior as topic number 5. I wanted to precede it with this. Especially for activities that have been a problem. Let's say you're trying to help your kids with schoolwork during this difficult time. Getting your kids up and into a morning routine is difficult. Whatever it is, the more things you can turn as a set routine. First we do this, then we do this, then we do this. You can use this acronym to go, and during school time, our conversation, and many of your kids, by the way, may recognize this acronym because in many of the school districts that we get to work with, this is posted in every classroom. During independent work times, here's what conversation is like. Here's how you can get my help if you have a question. The activity we're doing today is this, and this. Here's movement. If you want to get up and get a drink of water, here's whether or how and when you can do this. And here's what active participation looks like and what active participation sounds like. But now, regardless of whether you choose to use that acronym as a framework, if you're going to work on meal times, you want to have some set routines for that. What do we do to set the table together and so on? And if some of this issue of routines is new, again, I wish we could spend an hour just on routines, but the more that you can set it as very specific steps that at least initially do not vary from day to day, you're going to be better off. And the more you can clarify, for example, the conversation, and I don't want us to argue. Here's what arguing conversation would feel like. Here's what non-arguing conversation would feel like, so that you literally, for that specific context, bedtime, school time, meal time, you can go, this is how you're expected to behave. These are some ways that we've seen some misbehavior in the past, and here's what happens if you misbehave in these ways. The greater the clarity, the better. You also want to take this clarity and go, and because it's so important that you be a kind person, here's part of how we do meal times. Part of kindness at mealtimes is all of us setting the table. So Jonas, you're going to put the napkins on the table. Elena, you're gonna put the forks on the table, because that helps me, and that's very kind to me, and that allows me to be kind to you in terms of helping get the meal prepared. So use those positive words to describe the specific behaviors that you want kids exhibiting. And one thing that I forgot, just going back to the previous slide, excuse me. Never use the category of the misbehavior as an accusation. There's going to be very few things that I'm going to say, don't do this. This is going to be one. Don't ever say to your child, you're so irresponsible. You're so impolite. Don't say that. You can say that's impolite behavior, or that was impolite the way you treated Auntie Maria. You can say that, but you say, it's impolite the way you treated Auntie Maria because you said so and so and so and so, but because I know you are such a kind person and part of being kind is being polite, what I want you to do now is I want you to go and apologize to Aunt Maria for that. So you will use the positive words in accusing ways. You are a kind person. You are a strong person. You are a responsible person, because that will help shape them knowing, oh, mom views it so important that I be a strong person that she keeps saying I'm a strong person. And that was a great example of being strong, or that was a bad example of being strong. And here's why. So clarify your expectations as much as you can. Now, before we go to consequences for misbehavior, I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin and Elizabeth for a minute. And they've been kind of teaming together to go, are there some specific questions that a fair number of you, and we're delighted at how many of you are on this webinar, by the way, a fair number of you have asked. So let's open it up to Katie and Elizabeth.
Sure, Randy, I'm going to go ahead and start. There were two that I thought might fit in right around this time. And the first was, what might a daily schedule look like for my student? And this was particularly secondary, but I think this would apply all here. And then one more about limiting distractions during that daily schedule. Dogs, siblings, social media, that type of thing. So there was two about kind of setting expectations around how we frame our day.
Yeah, great questions, and great in part because there's not an easy answer. One of the things that we have been realizing is schools are all over the map in what they're asking you as families to do relative to schoolwork. Some schools, the secondary kids actually are online all day for each of their classes. Other schools, there's literally no guidance at all. They're not online with the school. They're not online with the teacher. Some school districts have even said there's some legal issues about whether we can do that if we don't yet have everybody having gotten their computers. So that'll vary a lot on what the school wants you to do. Those of you for whom the school is not saying, have your kids online at this time, obviously, if the school is saying that, do your best to make that happen. Follow that schedule so that your kids can get as much instruction from the school and you can provide that support as possible. But if you don't have that, your school time, you might set an hour or perhaps even 2 hours a day, depending upon the age of the child. And your goal, if you haven't gotten guidance from the school, is try to keep alive what the school has been teaching already this year. You do not have to tell yourself, I need to try to do everything that the school would do if this child were in session 6 hours a day, because even those of us who are teachers, that would be extremely difficult for us to do. But if you know that your children had been working on math facts, or if you know that your high school child in algebra has gotten to this point and needs practice with quadratic equations or whatever it happens to be, try to keep those things alive, but you may not necessarily need to go into it. Now, back to the first question, the daily schedule. No right answer on that one. You want to be careful not to set up a schedule that is so agonizing on you that you can't do anything at all. And so if you have relatively little guidance about what to do for the school, and you're going to have school times be maybe from 11 o'clock to noon and from 12:30, a break for lunch, and then from 12:30 to 1:30, perhaps, then that leaves the rest of your day flexible. Now, one of the things that I'm going to talk about in a subsequent point, and I'm going to have to be brief on these, but in a subsequent point, is basically do things with your kids. And so I'm going to table some of the daily schedule questions until we get to there, because one big question, and there's not a right answer to it, but I'm going to give you some guidance for perhaps how to think about it, is how much screen time are we going to allow the kids? And that's one of the biggest questions. I think there can be kind of open-ended times where the distract, well, yeah, the dog's running around, the other kids are running around, et cetera, but there's not really great task demands right now. So be it, but the screens aren't going to be on during that time. Then there's going to be other times that it can be screen time, but we're going to limit it to some degree. So I'm going to go ahead and go on. Caitlin and Elizabeth, I know you were pooling questions, and we've got a wonderfully interactive group here, which is so cool. But I'm going to go ahead and go on just because I'm a little bit behind. And topic number 5 is another one that quite literally we could spend an hour on. And this is the one where I know you'll have a huge number of questions. But any things that are really chronic problems, that are really getting in the way, the defiance issue, the refusal to follow directions issue, anything that is really getting in the way, think carefully about this, because a gentle correction like we just don't do this in this house, or a reminder that's not a kind way to do that, or what do you say when somebody gives you something, that's different if the kid is older, is chronically arguing back, and you're getting nowhere. You may need to set a consequence. Here's an example of a timeout for a younger kid, both with our own children. My kids are going to really regret hearing this one, but they've seen it with the grandkids as well. At Grandma and Grandpa's house, when Cabot or Katali misbehave, we just say, you need to go over and sit on the step. And they go over to our stairway and they sit on the step. And as soon as they come away from the step, everything's fine. It's bizarre how much they hate that. It's almost bizarre because it literally is just go sit on the, I don't want to go sit on the step. Well, as soon as you go sit on the step and you come back, and it's worked. I don't think we've had to ask them to go to the step in months, actually, surprisingly. Timeout for an older kid could be go to your room, but not if there's screen time and phones in the room. Don't attempt to do it. It's time out from the opportunity to earn positive reinforcement. So it can even be time out from screen time. Now, time owed is one that you actually don't want to use with real young kids, because it has a little more symbolic and slightly delayed value. But certainly if with your older kids, if screen time is of high value, or there is any other activity, and when I say screen time, I'm talking about phones, tablets, movies, not school-related time. This can be outside of school-related time. If they're working on tablets or whatever, part of school-related time, more power to them. But you should limit movies, etc., tablets, even TV watching time at night. I'm saying you put a limit on that. And I'm not going to tell you what it should be. 3 hours, half hour, I don't even know. You decide, but you don't want too much screen time, but you want it a little bit bigger than you might at first want. Because here's what you can do. Every time, let's say the child refuses to follow directions, you do a calm, neutral time discussion to define what that means. And you basically go, and when I give a direction, I'm going to say, this needs to be done within 5 minutes, or if it's a more complex direction, put these things away, it needs to be done within 10 minutes. If it's not done in 10 minutes, I'm just going to start the stopwatch. And if you have one, that's great. If not, just use your phone, start the time, and go, okay, it was 10 minutes, it's not done, I'm starting the time. The number of minutes this takes is how long you will lose from screen time later today. And it can just accumulate. And if the child racks up 3 hours and they ruined all of their screen time, they don't get screen time for the rest of the day. And what you want to do is you want a consequence that you don't have to make them do something or argue, particularly with older kids, where they know what the expectation is. And it's just, okay, if you choose not to, you're losing screen time. Loss of privileges, they should be daily kind of privileges. Earlier curfew, obviously in this time, hopefully your kids are largely with you the whole time. But when the immediate needs of this crisis ends, the best consequence for curfew violations is letting a kid know if your curfew is 9:30, any minutes that you are after 9:30, those will be minutes that are taken off of the 9:30 curfew in the future. So if you're 15 minutes late and you come in at 9:45, your new curfew will in fact be 9:15. And that carries for a couple of weeks or a month. Grounding, guess what? I should have taken that one off the list. We've all got PTSD because of that one, because we're all grounded at this point. And then planned ignoring. Planned ignoring is a great one for arguing. Just, that's arguing. When you're ready to talk to me in a respectful tone or kind tone or whatever, or the positive words you were using, I'm going to pretend like I don't see you or I don't hear you. It's extremely powerful. Okay, in the spirit of going on and trying to give you nuggets that you can expand in your own planning, let's go on to topic number 6. Part of moving from the misbehaviors to the positive traits that you value does mean spending time and paying attention. Engage in family-supported activities with screen time being limited. Talk to your kids. We have, because we're in Oregon and there's really pretty strict stay-at-home orders for us, we have been connecting with friends, family, and beloved work colleagues. Tomorrow afternoon, we've got a virtual happy hour where we'll do a Zoom meeting. We'll see each other all on the screen, sort of like a Brady Bunch kind of view of the screen. And we spent an hour talking together. We did that last night with one of our dear friends, Jan Reinhardtson. We did it yesterday with Anita Archer. Spending time is great. Having the kids be part of that is terrific. Setting up Zoom meetings. Our preschool granddaughter, about to be 5, she's had connect meetings with some of her friends. Eating together is huge. During this time and other times, one of the highest correlates of effective parenting, meaning kids not getting into severe trouble, one of the highest correlates is at least trying to strive for at least one meal a day where you eat together. It's not everybody just grabbing stuff. Doing chores together, playing games together. Now, if it's been a while since you played games together, pull those out and say, you don't have to play with us, but Marilyn, my wife, and I, we're going to play Monopoly. If you want to play Monopoly, you're welcome to play with us. If not, you don't have to, but you do not have your screens during this time. In general, the kids will probably come over if they see like you're having a pretty good time. So some other thoughts. Connect with your church or other organizations. Make decisions together. Talk about some of the issues that are going on. Now, you don't want to raise the anxiety of your kids, but even young kids know that we're anxious during this time. Talk to them a bit about what's going on. Talk to them. They should understand why they can't leave the home. Now, this again, it needs to be age appropriate, but you could actually, with some of your older kids, you could divide up some research things. Armando, I want you to take masks. Do construction masks like I have in my shop, do those work if we go shopping? I just did some research on that because I'm going to go shopping after this, and they pretty much don't. But you could assign one of your kids to that. You could assign one of your other kids to go, what is the trending like in our state? You could make decisions together about, hey, tomorrow one of us is going shopping. What are the things that we want? Let's plan the meals together. Work on projects together, even things as seemingly inane as jigsaw puzzles. And here's one for those of you, if you're a single parent and you've got 5 kids, good luck with this one and just carry on. But those of you who can, say, for the next 10 minutes, this is my time with you, and you and I will do whatever you want to do. As long as it doesn't interfere with anybody else and as long as it doesn't harm you, we can do whatever. I did this with my kids when they were little. We do this periodically with the grandkids, and they love being in a little bit of control of what happens during that time. But just all of that takes time, and I know that's hard. Okay, pressing on. And again, in the chat box, give us your questions. I am repeating this session 2 times next week. So if you have friends who you think, oh, this was worth doing, we got a few good ideas, share the link with them. But we will also look at what you shared with us in the chat box to try to make this hour even better. We'll also look very actively at this as we're working with school districts to go, we could offer this to the families of particular schools. Provide attention and recognition to increase the positive traits. Many of us with behavioral training, we go first to some kind of point system. Well, there's nothing wrong with point systems. There's nothing wrong with token economies. I'll talk about those very, very briefly, but just pay attention to your kids. Now, I'm going to come back to praise, but just interact. If you can spend 15 minutes doing a puzzle with 2 of your kids and you're just talking about stuff, or during chores, dear departed friend of ours, Kim Markham, referred to, she learned the most about being an adult, everything from how reproductive systems work to what you do responsibly as a person in her family. She learned from her grandma Viv when they were cooking together. Because during that time, it was not a sit down, oh, let's talk about sex. It was just as things came up when we're talking about cooking, Grandma Viv taught her what she knew about sexual responsibility. Grandma Viv talked to her about what it meant to be a responsible person and a responsible spouse. And then also just special privileges. Now, I want to come back to praise. Some people say you shouldn't praise, you should encourage. And I think that's largely semantics. If you don't like the word praise, substitute a different word for it, substitute positive feedback. But if you are going to praise or provide positive feedback, the tips are meaningful. Don't praise junk. If the kid makes the bed every single day, you don't have to praise making the bed every day. What you can do is every week or so, and again, this depends on age. If the kid has just started making the bed, praise making the bed every day. But if they've been making the bed every day for 4 years, just occasionally say, you know, one part of such a responsible person you are is I don't have to nag you about making the bed. I can't tell you how wonderful that is to have you being so responsible. And it's more meaningful to praise the couple of weeks than it would be to praise the kid every day who always makes the bed. Make sure it's accurate. If they didn't make the bed, don't praise them for making the bed. This is somewhat hypocritical, by the way, because I'm absolutely terrible about making the bed. But nonetheless, be specific and descriptive. Tell the kid what they've done. Don't just say good job. Try to have your praise be non-embarrassing. And part of non-embarrassing is if you, oftentimes siblings can get into patterns of this one's the good kid, this one's the bad kid, this one's the respectful kid, this is the disrespectful kid, whatever. Be really careful about overtly praising the child who has been disrespectful, making too big a deal out of being respectful in front of the one who's always respectful. Also, be careful of that. Well, Jason, you're always respectful. And then the look at Alan. Don't do that, okay? No, it's better if you're going to correct Alan, go ahead and correct Alan. But then when Alan is demonstrating some levels of respect, quietly say to him, Alan, I'm so impressed with the ethical nature of how you are responding in respectful kinds of ways. Again, whatever, you choose the words that work for you, but also given in a manner that fits your style. If you're very happy and effervescent, your positive feedback will be happy and effervescent. If one of your other caregivers in your home, your spouse or whomever, gives feedback in a very matter-of-fact way, the tendency of the one who's very friendly is to think, you're doing a very good job of being responsible, is in fact a bad way to praise. It's not, because your child would know if that person who is very matter-of-fact about things goes, oh, you're being so responsible, that they're probably not comfortable with that way. This can be given in a manner that fits your style. But the thing you want to look for, you've all heard the phrase, catch them being good. Here's what I really want you to work on catch them being good at, or when, rather. It's when they exhibit a behavior that in the past would have been one that drove you crazy. If it's arguing and the child does it without arguing, let them know in a non-embarrassing way. And again, if the sibling is there, just be cautious. If it would be taken by Alan as, oh, you're embarrassing me in front of Jason, then don't do it. But that's the thing you look for. You look for those times that Alan is not arguing, and you say, I can tell you 3 great examples of how responsible you've been in following directions or accepting some of the things that I have to tell you as a parent. So your praise, you want it to be as targeted as possible, as informational as possible. One of the things that we can forget is how hard it is to learn something new. Those of you who are skiers, try to go back to the first time you were ever on skis. If you're a good skier, you don't need anybody praising every great right turn, but your first time on skis, you needed praise for every great right turn, every great left turn. You did a fine job of, and my son who's listening to that, who's a fabulous skier, whatever I say, he's gonna go, well, that's not the advice a ski teacher would give. But nonetheless, it would be descriptive praise about where your body is positioned, where your weight is, and so on, because you need that feedback from somebody who knows better how to ski to learn how to ski. Okay, so carrying on, praise, interactions, extra responsibilities, special privileges. I do have to say, my nuclear family had its problems, substance problems in the home, and so I was never abused, but it was typical problems of severe alcoholism in the home. But one thing that my parents did a fabulous job of is turning over responsibilities to my brother and I as we demonstrated level of responsibility. And it became, as we were growing up as teenagers, one of the greatest compliments was being given that extra level of freedom, or that extra level of, we need you to take this one on because this needs to be part of helping our family survive. Carrying on. Be aware of ratios of interactions. This one is the sum total of your corrections, even when you do it the right way. What do you say when somebody gives you something that's arguing? I'm not going to pay attention to it right now. That's refusing to follow directions. After 10 minutes, I'll start the timer. You're losing screen time. All of those would be corrective in their nature. Even if you do it well, even if you do it perfectly, you're paying attention to the child at the time they're misbehaving. You want the sum total of everything else. Let's play this game together. Let's do this chore together. Let me tell you, I'd like to talk about what a good job you did on your schoolwork today, because you did this, this, and this. That's very independent. The sum total of those should exceed by at least 3. Some people should say it should be 5. Some people should say it should be 9. In Safe and Civil, we think 3 is kind of a tipping point, but go with whatever number works for you. But you want more of, hey, Janie, nice to see you this morning. Hey, Janie, thank you for getting dressed without having to ask you to do that. Hey, Janie, would you come over and help me with, oh, thank you. I appreciate your help with this. The sum total of those should be minimally 3 times more than what do you say when somebody gives you something, or other corrections that we have to do. This is a concept that is very hard for us as parents and very hard for us as teachers, because when kids are doing well in either the home or in the classroom, we can be thinking about the bazillion other things that we have to do in our jobs and in our responsibilities and in trying to get through these difficult times. And we can end up, when the kids are behaving well, leaving them to their own devices. We want to do that, but only if your kids can only be independent for 5 minutes, you want to let them be independent for 4, and you want to go over to them in age-appropriate ways and congratulate them for the level of independence, because you caught them while they were being independent. If you wait longer, if you wait until they're not independent and they've gotten in a fight with each other and you have to go, okay, I'm not going to mediate who wins and who loses, but you go over here, 10 minutes, you can start playing again if you choose to. That's paying attention to the misbehavior, which you had to do. But if you could have caught them at 4 minutes, you might have prevented that. And when they hear, oh, Dad really likes it when I'm independent. Oh, and just getting along with playing with my sister is an example of independence. Well, that's cool. I am independent. Yeah. And there may be increased motivation. The child may not even be thinking that consciously, but what you pay attention to, you will get more of in the future. And I would gently suggest, don't beat yourself up about this one. We all got way more guilt to carry than we need to be carrying around. But my guess is the things that you wrote in the chat box that drive you crazy, I think if you think about it, you're paying way more attention to those misbehaviors than you are the positive opposite of those misbehaviors. What's the positive opposite of a misbehavior? It's one of those broad categories. In my case, kind, ethical, strong, or responsible. Those are the things you complement, and you can complement 1,000 different behaviors under just those 4 labels, but you want to keep those labels in front, and you want to keep the positive interactions at a very, very high level. These I will be more brief on, and Katie and Elizabeth, let's end with just a couple of questions, and after I do 9 and 10, and then we'll end with that, and then just a quick reminder at the end about some ways that you can get some assistance in your own life, perhaps with the school personnel that your schools go to or your children go to. This one I'll be brief. Try to model the behaviors you want your children children to develop. And if you can't model the thing you want, discuss that with the child. Here's a rather harsh example. If you're a smoker, you probably know darn good and well the research on smoking, and you probably are hoping that your children don't become smokers. And if you can't quit, tell your children, I've tried to quit. I'll probably try again sometime. Right now, this is too stressful for me. But my hope is that you, being such an independent person, that you won't be a smoker. You don't have to say that over and over and over again, but just periodically. If you don't want your kids to yell, don't yell. I always do find it somewhat ironic, back in the days that we were in airplanes, buses, and stores, to have a parent screaming at their children to quit yelling. It's like, well, hey, they're gonna listen more to the yelling that you're doing than the tone of voice that you're using than they are the words that are saying you shouldn't be yelling right now. But if you're a yeller and you can't quit yelling, tell your kids, part of what I hope you will learn is not to do. But I get frustrated and I yell. Tell your kids, I hope you don't do that. And then 10, monitor your kids' activities. Two of the greatest correlates, two of the greatest relationships between being lucky enough as a parent to having helped your kids navigate through especially the dangerous teenage years and the dangerous early adult years, where the ramifications of a choice that they could make could be really severe in terms of an accident or problems with the law or anything else. Two of the things that they find highly correlated, I've shared with you one already. It is some fairly regular and repetitively regular meal times. The other one is knowing where your kids are. Now, your kids hate this. The older they get, the more independent they want to be, but you're not going to let a 3-year-old have the option to play on the freeway. You're not going to let a 12-year-old have completely unregulated, unsupervised media access. A 12-year-old, and I choose that age because I think that one's an obvious one where there's some turning points. I'm not going to say 16, 17, 18, there you turn your kids over when you feel you've established the values that are necessary. But a 12-year-old should not have unfettered access to the internet, because the level of danger that they can get into it, they should know that you are going to monitor search histories. You're going to look over their shoulders periodically. You're not going to let them have a phone in their room so that they can be texting all night long with their friends. When it's bedtime, the devices are under the parents' supervision. Now, at what ages you do that obviously needs to be up to you, the maturity of the child, and so on. But your children need to know that you love them so much, you are not going to allow them to be in a situation where they might experience harm. Use that 3-year, even if your kids are 12 and 15 years old, use the 3-year-old example. When you were 3, I would not have given you the choice to go play on the side of the freeway. You might have been able to figure out, don't cross that yellow line, but you might not have. And if I had made that open to you as a parent, you could have been hurt really badly. I didn't make that choice available. That's why I'm monitoring these activities. Okay, we have just a couple of minutes left, and I have about 1 minute of conclusion that I want to do. Katie, Elizabeth?
Randy, we had one question early on. I know you don't have any issue with this, but nor did you in your history. How do I stay calm when my son argues with me?
Go ahead and say to your child, sit down at that calm, neutral time and say, you argue. It's perfectly okay. You don't want to say, you're an arguer. That's basically saying that's who you are. You're a responsible person and you argue. Now, let me give you an example of what I mean by arguing, and then give that specific example. And then at the time of the argument, you can just say, that's arguing. I will talk to you when you're, and then you refer quickly back to the expected behaviors. So when I talked about not calling the kid the name, you can use those misbehaviors. Be cautious of some of the ones that I had. Let me just go back to my notes. Some of the misbehaviors, arguing, I would use arguing. That's an example of arguing. Complaining, I would use complaining. I might not use clingy. Clingy is, it just sounds kind of negative. If you've got a young child and they're clingy, talk about independent and dependent. And then you can describe, hey, the behavior when you're just hanging on my leg, that's called dependent. You don't need to hang on my leg because you're such an independent person. So anything that sounds kind of demeaning, don't use those words. Let's see, I'm just going to jealous. I wouldn't use jealous. I would use it's not cooperative when you use those. I'd be cautious of manipulating, procrastinating, talk about those specific behaviors. But for things that are fairly observable, refusing to follow directions, complaining, demanding, go ahead and use those words. Don't say you are a demanding person, because that almost sounds inescapable. Well, if I'm such a demanding person, I might as well learn to do it really, really well. You want to go, no, these are some demanding behaviors that you as a very kind, responsible person should not use. Okay, let me, just watching time here, and my apologies. I had hoped to leave more time for questions. My apologies, but I do want to honor the time commitments that you've made. I also want to suggest one resource that we publish here at Ancora Publishing. It was written by one of the foremost behavioral experts in the nation, Dr. Bill Jensen, who you educators on the line may recognize, the Tough Kid book, Tough Kid Toolbox, etc. Those are Bill and his colleagues' resources. This is one that they wrote for parenting through tough kid moments, those difficult times, and it is filled with strategies. If you got some good ideas from this book will give you lots more. So think about ordering it. And the follow-up email that we'll provide to all of you, we have all of your emails as a result of you signing up for this, you'll have. Also, if it seems of interest, particularly you school administrators, the idea that we are doing with some school districts right now is working with each of their schools where we provide a 4-part presentation to take these kinds of strategies. That's my timer to say that my time is up. These kinds of strategies, but fleshing it out across 4 sessions, perhaps once a week or maybe even twice a week sessions, but that allows parents to try things out and ask questions. If we can do this with you, we would spend time with your school counselor and any other players that you wanted, so that families that have questions during and after the presentations could pose those to some of the school team to provide specific answers that just because of volume, we haven't been able to respond to here or respond to others. And let me just end with thank you for spending this time. I hope you got a few ideas. Remember, this is about shaping. Tomorrow can be a little bit better. The next day can be a little bit better. And you don't have to get it right 100% of the time. If over time you do 51%, it's all going to work out. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Katie and Elizabeth. Let's see, are we completely off now, Nick?
No, I'm gonna hit it now, and maybe we can debrief after.
Great.